Okay, why don't we go ahead and get started if the presenters will turn on their cameras.
All right. Well, welcome everyone to today's online panel discussion. I'm happy that that folks are joining us today. Today is the topic of today's panel, as you can see in front of you, is ethnicity and culture in early Louisiana history. Today we will have three presenters: Beer Prakken, Jamie Oxendine, and Charles Cox. My name is Wendy Gaudin. I am a professor of history at Xavier University of Louisiana. I am a Louisiana historian as well as a Creole historian, and I'm very eager to hear our panel presentations today. And I'm really pleased to be chairing this panel. Before each speaker offers their presentation, I will share their biography with everyone so that we know something about everyone who's speaking. And just for your information, every speaker will have approximately 20 minutes to present. You are welcome to offer questions or comments in the chat. And at the end of the three presentations, we will have time for questions and answers and comments. All right. So welcome, everyone. It's really my pleasure to be here. And so I'm going to introduce our first speaker today. Beer Prakken is currently a PhD student at the University of Groningen in the Netherlands. Beer is researching humor and play usages by politicians. He recently obtained a master's degree in history and philosophy. Beer has a strong interest in the history of Louisiana, yay, and wrote his BA thesis about P.G.T. Beauregard's post-bellum career and the Louisiana Unification Movement. His MA thesis is about Canal Street in New Orleans. Thank you, Beer.
Thank you very much for the great introduction, and I'm so happy to be here. So let's get straight into it. I will first put on my timer. And share my presentation with you guys. Wait a minute. Share screen. Okay. I think this works. And play from the start. All right, let's go. Well, my research is about Black struggle and agency on Canal Street's neutral ground between 1837 and 1841. Here, to get into it, we see Canal Street in New Orleans today, as you may already know, of course, and it's neutral ground, the street's median, in the middle of it. And to get in a historical feel about it, it's a painting derivative from a photograph from Canal Street in 1857. A couple years after my research, but it was a nice photo, so let's just begin with it. The structure of my paper is an introduction, then we go through the method and my sources, and then my first part, the history of Canal Street, neutral ground, then to the second part, the Black experience on Canal Street's neutral ground, then to the third part, the dominant and alternative readings of these experiences on Canal Street's neutral ground. And then, of course, to the conclusion. Well, as you may already know, the neutral ground is a New Orleans dialect for the median of the street. Canal Street is the widest street in New Orleans, with a width of 171 feet and a median of 60 feet wide. And the Picayune, which was founded in January 1837, began with referring to Canal Street as neutral ground. my research analyzes newspaper segments from the newspaper, the Daily Picayune and the New Orleans Bee, or the La Baille, detailing the Black struggle on Canal Street's neutral ground. Specifically, I'm going to ask what is the role of Canal Street's neutral ground as a site of Black struggle and how Creoles, Americans, and Black people perceive the space. My two main primary sources are the Daily Picayune, that tries to represent the American perspective, and the La Baille, the Bee, that tries to represent the French Creole perspective. And I tried to retrieve the Black perspective through an against the grain reading of these newspaper segments about Canal Street. And there are, of course, as you know, Picayune and the Bee are very famous local newspapers during that time. And there are some important differences to keep in mind. The Bee mostly wrote, in that time wrote about international, national, or state politics, and or more serious stories, where the Picayune was one of the first newspapers that wrote about, more smaller local stories and on a more ironic tone and more satire in it. And my other primary sources are court cases and legislation from the municipalities. Well, as you can see here, I will quickly skip to the historiography, and the two main things what you maybe need to know is that about the washerwoman in the antebellum New Orleans or Louisiana, there hasn't been written a lot, researched a lot about it. Historian Jane DeBell wrote, done interesting research into the washerwoman and found out that most of the free women of color, had the occupation of a washerwoman or laundresses. And Canal Street, most histories about it, most deep analyses about Canal Street was done by geographer Richard Campanella, who wrote about the neutral ground as an ethnic border between two municipalities, and to what extent it really was an ethnic border or not. Well, let's just jump to the history. I'm going to skip to it for the time. It all begins with the Great Fire of New Orleans. Here we see a picture of it. The Great Fire, of course, you may know it. A lot of buildings were destroyed, and because of that, Bertrand Gravier gave up his plantation grounds to be surveyed in a new neighborhood into the Faubourg Saint-Marie. And it was first a commons ground on the left of, or the west of, the old city center. And between this commons ground and the new Faubourg Saint-Marie and the Greffier plantation came the future Canal Street. And first it was a wasteland with an old road and a moat. And eventually, after a lot of legal struggles, I won't get into detail with that, even with Marquis de Lafayette, the old French and American revolutionary hero. By an act of Congress, Canal Street was created, and the Orleans Navigation Company got the rights to dig the canal. Eventually, as you well know it, the canal never came. So in 1837, the city councils denied the right to build the canal. And as beautifully explained by Campanella, Canal Street's spaciousness and excellent position invited the construction of institutional and substantial buildings. So in this place, a lot of important institutional buildings like the Custom House, but also Louisiana State House and the Gothic Church were built. And it was also because a lot of Americans who went to the city after Louisiana Purchase were settling down in the Faubourg Saint-Marie. So it became a more American populated on the west side and a more French Creole populated city center on the right side. Eventually, there were a lot of tensions between both groups in the politics. And eventually, after a failed 4th of July celebration in 1835, the city council decided to split up the cities into three municipalities. And the first municipality was this area, the old city center. And the second municipality was the Faubourg Saint-Marie. That was the more American city center. And the neutral ground, Canal Street, formed a judicial border, a neutral space the border between those city centers. So what happened was, as you can see it here more beautifully, is here the old city center, and here the second municipality. And on the outskirts, the third municipality, where more recent immigrants and free people of color lived. Well, in 1836, after that, no municipality wanted to take care of Canal Street because it wasn't in their power, in their authority to do it. And also because of a financial crisis, there weren't a lot of funds to do it. And there wasn't part of any municipality. So all the Canal Street was neglected by both municipalities. There was a half-dug canal with a gutter and with straight iron pipes laying there everywhere. There were even stories about dead dogs and animals on the streets. And it was quite, as the Picayune describes it, quite an ugly and degenerate place. And they also the Picayune describes problems with washerwomen and black people who were coming to this neutral ground between both municipalities. And from 1838 onwards, a lot of public improvements came about because the municipalities started to work together and do something with the street and clean it up. Well, then we go to the second part. And this is where the black experience on this street comes in. And we first analyze the washerwoman conflict. Well, the Picayune first mentions the washerwoman in March of 1837. They mentioned that the commercial bank now has to, who owns the iron pipes of the water system in the city, has to clean them up and remove them for the navigation company, because the navigation company wanted to build the canal. So they say, and the poor washerwoman will be compelled to hang out their clothes in obscure backyards. From this segment and other segments, we learn that washerwomen used iron pipes for washing their clothes and hanging out their clothes. The reason was, of course, for a navigation company to build the canal. However, as I said before, the second municipality had a fight with the navigation company. And here we see a court statement from the Louisiana Supreme Court, about a court case from the Orleans Navigation Company against the second municipality. And then if you read this, when the second municipality sent a body of men and by force of arms drove petitioners, agents, and workmen away, prevented them from prosecuting said work. So in November of 1837, a couple months later, the first and second municipality worked together and said, well, we don't want the canal anymore. And they decided to illegally deny the navigation company the right to build the canal in Canal Street. So after that, the canal never came. That's also a whole side story about why the city council saw it as a commons and the era and the navigation company wanted the canal. So, but I won't dive into that too. So back to the washerwoman. There were also other acts from the second municipality that were specifically targeted against the washerwoman, like one from September 1837 that made it illegal to hang out any article of clothing or any other thing to air or dry on Canal Street. It was later, a year later, accepted by the first municipality. And then also another act came in December 1837 to drain the half-dug canal, because there was a lot of water, it was a real gutter, because the canal was not finished by the construction of the navigation company. So in a new year, in January 1838, new efforts were made to clean up Canal Street from its iron pipes, and to drain the canal. The washerwoman didn't like that. The Picayune describes in January 19 that the washerwoman even brought a two-mounted cannon on neutral ground to stop the commercial bank from cleaning up or getting those iron pipes away. There was a dispute among the washerwoman and the banking companies, and the cannon was in possession of the washerwoman. So that was quite the event. And 2 weeks later, the Daily Picayune said a compromise has been effected between the pipe corporations and the washerwoman. And they ironically say worthy because they were not fans of the washerwoman. They complained a lot about the washerwoman and they wanted them away. And they say one of these worthy women was in earnest converse with a gas pipe director. And it seems that washerwoman had quite amount of agency during that time. However, after August 1838, reform policy is passed by both municipalities to clean up the canal street. And here is also a satirical pamphlet made by the Picayune, where that is also signed by Winnie Washtop and Chloe co-signed, so it's not a real pamphlet from the washerwoman itself, and it's also written in a phonetically bad English that is also used to satirize Black people during that time in the Picayune, and it's like a fake reaction to these reforms, which you can see from this that they really had the washerwoman in mind. It was a big thing for them to have them get away. The Bee did not write a lot about washerwoman. They did write, but they in their style wrote a long thread about the problems on the canal street a year later. They said that the washerwoman ought to pay for the privilege to hang out their clothes there. And what's funny to read here is that they are now talking about the trees. So the washerwoman couldn't use the iron pipes anymore, but they moved on to the trees. So are quite adaptable in that sense. And we see in New Orleans B, it's maybe potentially different in style, but it's less racialized language. And it could be the reason that for the editors of the Label, that it was more normalized for Creole people during that time to have Black people walking around and doing their thing. And for Americans, it was more, it seemed like for the editors for Picayune more of a problem. But however, by 41, most complaints about washerwoman ceased. And by the way, if we go back to it also talks about white men, this pamphlet, so we can refer from this and other newspaper segment that the washerwomen were mostly Black women. And to the second part of the part 2, Neutral Ground is also a Black meeting place. There was a hotel, catfish hotel made from, without any permits, of course, from gunny bags, old carpets, salt sacks, and floor mattings on the neutral ground. And they also say, like, Black people of all sorts and sizes hold indisputable sovereignty in neutral ground in 1839. And they also, this also interesting piece, 2 years later. The Black people know that this point at the neutral ground is between 2 municipalities. And if they are approached from one side by anyone looking like an officer, they move on to the other to keep out of the way. But however, after 1841, most reform was done and the whole place was cleaned up. And after a couple of years, also a police officer on the neutral ground was selected, so appointed. And then we go to the last section to have a dominant and alternative reading about these newspaper segments. Dominant reading, of course, is that by the Picayune and the Bee, but also by the residents and the municipalities, that it was a degenerate place, a very ugly place, but that could be and should be a beautiful promenade in the future. They really saw, of course, as you all know it, New Orleans during that time was one of the most affluent cities of the United States and maybe of the world. So they really saw it as the street that should be a beautiful example of the street, but of the city, but it wasn't. And both French Creoles and Americans perceived this neutral ground together as nuisance and worked together to work against it. And you also see that the Picayune during those 4 years held a long smear campaign with a lot of articles to campaign against this, the visitors and all the problems in their heads on the neutral ground. So they had quite amount of political agency, presumably, these editors. An alternative reading is that these marginalized groups utilize this free space for their own benefits. The washerwoman used the iron pipes laid at the trees. For the Black people, it was a space out of sight from both restrictive and racially oppressive municipalities. And there's also symbolic meaning for of the iron pipe. There's a nuisance for one, for the white editors, for the Creole and American editors, but it was also very important, a livelihood for the others. The washerwoman even fought for this place, and by bringing a cannon on the neutral ground. There's no account of the washerwoman, but it shows that the newspaper segment shows that the washerwoman saw Canal Street as an important place that they wanted to protect. And the agency of the washerwoman during the conflict is also speak volumes. However, political forces, the city council, worked together and eventually stopped this agency. And this shows that cleaning up public improvements are not always improvements for everybody, especially when the work is targeted and there are marginalized people. This also relates to problems of gentrification today. Well, now we go to the conclusion. We see that Canal Street began from a commons land, a no man's land, and rose to an institutional street. And between 1837 and 1841, it was a true neutral ground for Black people. It was a space away from racially restrictive society. There was a lot of the power of the political forces and public improvements. And it's nice to see that the washerwoman and Black people didn't saw it as a nuisance, as a problem, the Canal Street's ugliness or whatever, but as an opportunity to get away, to start new things, a catfish hotel, to do their job and to hang out their clothes and do other things, or to gamble there. And the ways in which neutral space attract marginalized people is an interesting topic that, in my opinion or my view, that does not get the attention it deserves, and this should be quite interesting. Well, this was my presentation. Thank you very much for listening. I will now close my screen, and this is the legislature that I used. Well, okay. How do I do this? Here. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Beer. Our second presenter today is Jamie K. Oxendine. Jamie is a Native American author, educator, historian, and speaker, and a member of the Lumbee tribe of North Carolina. Jamie is the author of Southeastern Woodland Designs in 2018, as well as an author. Jamie is also an author and an editor at www.powwows.com. Jamie has been an adjunct professor of Native American Studies at Bowling Green State University, Ohio State University, the University of Toledo, Lourdes University, and Jamie has worked as the Native American liaison and education consultant for Ohio University. He has served on the Board of Trustees for the Ohio Humanities Council, the Board of Trustees for the Fallen Timbers Battlefield Preservation Commission, and governor appointee to the Ohio Historic Preservation Board. He has also sat on the Access Grants panel with the National Endowment for the Humanities. Thank you for being with us, Jamie. You can go right ahead.
Thank you very much. I appreciate it. Welcome everyone from the great state of North Carolina. So we will share the screen. Hope everybody can see the screen. Oh, there it is. We're going to be talking about designs and body art, specifically of the Southeast, including paint, tattoos, and good old body modification. When you think of Native America, most people think of this. This is a beautiful picture, and it is Native American. It is the late 19th century, but this is the Northern Plains specifically. This would have been seen among the tribes in what we now call the Dakotas, lower parts of Canada, almost down to where the Northern Plains and the Southern Plains meet in what is now Oklahoma. And then eventually it spread all over Native America. But this is not the Southeast, but it is a beautiful picture of what most people think when you say the word Native American. We're going to concentrate more on the Southeast. This is the Southeastern complex, and it influenced more of any other part of culture in what we now call North America. As you can see, it stretched from the of Florida, the Gulf Coast, all the way up to present-day Wisconsin. Its influence has been seen in specifically our art and the culture, and the same pieces that have been found in mounds from the Carolinas all the way up to Cahokia and many of the mounds in what is now the Ohio River Valley. When we talk about the Southeast, we sometimes concentrate on just the United States, but we are talking about the entire continent, not just what we call the United States. This is the southeastern part of what we now refer to as the United States. It is kind of strange the way it's drawn. If you ever come to my beautiful state and this part of Virginia, there's a natural fall line where you see the cursor, and that's what separates the southeastern woodland culture from this area, which would have been the northeastern woodland culture. As you can see, all of what we now call the great state of Louisiana is included in southeastern woodland culture. Many of these tribes do not exist anymore, but some of them you may know, and some of them are named after, some towns and cities are named after them. And another is the Alabama tribe. That's where the state got its name. Now let's look at some symbols. When you say Native America, a lot of people think of the Native American medicine wheel. Obviously, we didn't use the word medicine or wheel. Those are European terms. But these are the colors most associated with the Great Lakes and the Great Plains. That's different from this particular one, which this is the Southeastern design. I'm gonna go back and forth a little bit, let everybody see. You should see the most main difference is that the Southeastern tribes use blue. Now I'm doing a little bit of audience participation. If you can, I want you to chat and if you can each of the four directions each of these colors stand for. I'll give you just a few seconds and see if you can come up with anything. I always like to ask my students if they can come up with what they think each one was for. Now, I can't see the chat, so if anyone can, let me know if they have any ideas. All right, someone says the four elements. I was able to pull down the chat. That's a good close guess. Actually, these were for the four directions. So the four cardinal directions. Can you figure out which one goes with which? Give you just a few more seconds before we go on to the next slide. All right, I'll give you a little bit of hint. In the Southeast, yellow is for the East because every morning a big ball grows and it's beautiful and yellow. When it sets in the Southeast, practically all the time, all four seasons, we get a beautiful red and orange, so that's for the West. Just like everything else on your temperature scans on your car and your house, blue was for the North because it was for cold, and white was for the South because it stood for warmth. All right, now I'm having a problem. The PowerPoint doesn't want to move forward. Anybody have a suggestion on what's happening? So I think I am a little lost. Try this again. It's a joy of technology. And there we go. And this is what a Southeastern medicine symbol would have looked like. before contact. This is made of stone. This would have been worn around the neck of a man or a woman. These two tiny holes is where a thong would have been put, perhaps made of leather or made of jute. The circle stands for no end and no beginning. These interlocking symbols represent infinity and no beginning or no end. And there's 8 dots. The Southeastern tribes actually believe in 8 cardinal directions.
Okay, it looks like we may have lost Jamie Oxendine. Oh, there we are. Are you there, Jamie? Let's try to get your sound back and your screen share. All right, let's see if we can work on. Okay, Jamie, your sound, you're still muted. If you can unmute yourself.
All right, how's that?
Wonderful.
All right, sorry about that. That's the joy of horrible technology here in this part of the beautiful state of North Carolina. This is another symbol of the Southeast. This is the water spider. This has been found in mounds from all over the Southeast. It's been found in mounds of what we now call North Carolina, Arkansas, Georgia, Louisiana, Texas, as far north as Cahokia in Illinois. It's a wonderful symbol of the story of what brought fire to the people. The Southeastern tribes believe that of all the powerful and awesome creations of God, it was the lonely water spider that brought to the people. And here it is on a gorget made of shell that would have been worn around the neck. It's always female. I always refer to water spider as female. Some of the tribes, like the Cherokee, refer to her as grandmother water spider. She can be oriented up or down. Another symbol of the Southeast is these birds. These are flickers. They're also known as woodpeckers. They are dancing around the medicine wheel and the sun in a counterclockwise direction. Everything in the Southeast was done in what we now call counterclockwise. We didn't have clocks, so we used the term direction of the wind. And that comes from the winds coming off the Gulf Coast, the winds coming from the west over the Appalachian Mountains, and the winds coming off the Atlantic. When they all meet, they cause things to turn in the direction of a counterclockwise position. And we call that direction of the wind. This particular symbol has been found just like the water spider in mounds from what is now Carolinas, as far north and as far west as Oklahoma. And here's an example of that on a piece of stone that would have been worn around the neck. It has the 4 woodpeckers, although they're not dancing in one direction, and they are dancing around the sacred circle and cross, which represents our 4 directions. Complete different symbol. Let's see if anyone can guess what this symbol is. This is a chunky stone. This is a stone that was used in the game of chunky. A normal size of a plate was along a flat surface. And warriors would throw either their spear or they would try to shoot their arrow, not at the stone, but where they thought the stone might land. Does anybody want to take a guess on the animal that's on this particular chunky stone? It's a very big symbol in the Southeast. All right, I'll just go ahead and tell you. This is a panther, or another term was jaguar. We often think of jaguars in what is now the Aztec and Mayan cultures and that part of Central America, but jaguars were far north as what is we call Kansas. Here's another gorget that would have been worn around the neck. Necklace is another term in English. You can see the 2 holes where a thong would have been put. This is the jaguar or panther, and this is the falcon. The falcon was the most powerful air animal for the Southeastern tribes. The panther was the most powerful land animal. Occasionally, the two would meet to see who was the most strongest. And I like to say that this is one of the things that the white man stole from us. As you can tell, this is the Atlanta Falcons versus the Carolina Panthers. See, the white man stole everything from us. Completely different symbol of the Southeast. And this was definitely known among the tribes, what we now call Louisiana on the Gulf Coast. This is the water panther. It was well known that all the tribes from the Southeast all the way up to the Great Lakes believed that great bodies of water were protected by a powerful being called an underwater panther. This is a beautiful artist rendition of the underwater panther. Another name for the underwater panther was the tribe got it from, known as people of the Cap, and the lake in the Great Lakes is named after them. Here are complete different water. These are, feather serpents. The Southeastern tribes believed in a serpent that could fly. It was a member of the rattlesnake family, and you can tell by seeing these beautiful rattles on each of the snakes. And they are dancing counterclockwise. They were referred to as protectors of water, all water, including not just bodies of water, but the water as it evaporates and goes back into the sky. That's why they flew around the sky. Complete different symbol. This is Birdman, and is part bird, part man. Normally he is part falcon and part man. He's a great warrior. We know this by the fact that he holds in one hand a severed head, and in the other hand he holds a war club. Looks like a violin. A lot of my young students say it looks like a violin. It's not. And here's another thing that the white man stole from us. Long before Marvel Comics and DC Comics had a person who was part man or part bird and could fly, we had Birdman. So yet another thing that the comics have taken from the Native American culture. My students like hearing these little jokes about the culture. Here is Birdman on, this is a piece of copper. The largest piece of copper that we found with a Birdman on it is actually found outside of Chillicothe, Ohio, and the Mound City that is there. If you get a chance to go there, you will see a beautiful piece of Birdman in copper. Another beautiful symbol of the Southeast was the rattlesnake. Rattlesnake was highly, highly respected of snakes because witches and other ghosts and various other spirits were afraid of them. So if you saw a rattlesnake anywhere near around your home, that was actually a good sign, not a bad sign, because witches were greatly feared of rattlesnakes. These are two rattlesnakes, two specifically types of rattlesnakes. These are the horned rattlesnakes, and they are dancing counterclockwise around the all-seeing hand and eye of God. This particular symbol has also been found in mounds and archaeological digs from Florida as far north as what we now call Wisconsin. Here are some of the many, many pieces of rattlesnake that have been found at just one area. These have all been found in what we now call Tennessee. So the rattlesnake was very important as a symbol to be worn around the neck for both man and woman for protection from witches. Here's a beautiful picture of Precontact of the people of the Southeast. This is what you would have seen in what we now call Eastern Texas, Louisiana, Florida, what we now call in North Carolina. We have a reconstructed village called Town Creek Indian Mound outside of Rockingham, if you ever like to visit. This gentleman has one of these mini gorgets hanging around his neck. He has on a kilt. That's the English word, of course, for any type of wrap-around garment, and a beautiful feather cloak made from various types of feathers of ducks and turkeys and other waterfowl. Now let's look at some of the other parts of the Southeast. These are Carolina, or sometimes called Virginia, Algonquin men, and they carry a longbow. The bow was the height of the warrior. They are wearing panther hides. For the longest time, people thought these were deer skin, but look closely at the tail. That clearly tells us they are panther. The panther was very important. If you had a male child, you raised your male child on panther hide. Notice what was worn at the the waist and not at the back. And I want you to look closely at the haircut styles. I'm going to ask you a question about that here coming up very soon. Europeans were able to find out if a man was right or left-handed by the way he cut his hair. So I'm going to ask you that question as well, if you'd like to put in the chat. Why do you think that is possible? While some of you try to answer that question, he is beautifully body painted. We happen to know that this particular famous painting that is in the British Museum, this particular gentleman has on body paint and not necessarily tattoos. Remember that the Europeans drew everybody like they thought they saw everybody. This is why they had such a European look. It was very rare to find artists to draw the natives exactly the way they were instead of the way they saw them. We see this in a lot of European art. It's one of the reasons why Jesus looks like he's from France instead of from Israel. Now, here are some designs that would have been tattooed on a warrior to show which particular society he belonged to. So each warrior would have belonged to society, whether they were in the same tribe or the same clan, and they would have used these particular types of tattoo markings on the shoulder to show them. Anybody came with an idea on how you can tell if a person was right or left-handed by the way they cut their hair yet? If you haven't, I'll tell you. If you shave the entire right side of your head, you are right-handed. If you shave the entire left side of your head, you're left-handed, because that would keep your hair from getting into the string of your bow. This is a beautiful picture of a Timucua man. These are the ancestors of the Florida natives. And he is completely tattooed from head to toe. He is covered in beautiful pieces of copper. That's what's around his elbows and what's around his knees. The copper did not come from the Southeast. Where did the copper come from? The copper came from as far away as what we now call Michigan. And it's one of the reasons why in Michigan you find beautiful pieces of mica that came from the Carolinas. Long before contact, the trade was amazing. And here's a better artist rendition of that same Timucua man with his beautiful tattoos from head to toe and his beautiful copper pieces. When the Spanish came, they realized eventually they couldn't find the 7 cities of gold, but they found other gold. They found it in copper and various other metals. And later the English found their gold in tobacco and cotton, indigo and rice, and on and on. Here's a beautiful picture of a Algonquin Carolina woman. Now, this is after contact. We know because the little girl was playing with a doll. The lady is in, this is more likely deerskin, although we do know the ladies of the Southeast from Louisiana all the way up to the Carolinas did make their own fabrics and textiles. One of them was out of Spanish moss. She is beautifully tattooed on her arms, on her chin, and on her face. She wears a wampum collar. This is a collar made from conch shells and clam shells. And here's my third joke in this presentation. You see the ladies carrying a doll. These were often called black robes. Those were the priests. And here's my joke. What do Native Americans call the other white meat? The answer is Jesuit priest. Here are natives contact sitting to meet, and this gentleman is right-handed because the entire right side of his head is shaved, so the string of his bow will not get caught in his hair. And these are flicker feathers, part of the symbol of the Southeast. It was the warrior symbol of the Southeast. Here's a beautiful Algonquin woman. Notice her beautiful tattoos on her legs and on, as well as on her chin. Another Algonquin woman, referred to as a woman of Secotan. This is a village outside
Jamie, are you able to wrap it up? We're about at 20 minutes now, so if you can take a moment just to wrap up your presentation. Thank you. We can't hear you.
My apologies.
That's all right.
That's the joy of technology. Well, unfortunately. Let me move real quick through some of these. You can see the beautiful body art and techniques, the tattoos. Head flattening was a part of our tribes. And here's my last 3 slides, pictures of me dressed in Southeastern woodland attire that you would have seen right around 1790 to about 1800. There's 1, there's 2, and there's 3. Thank you very much. I do apologize again for the problems with technology. I'm a small part of North Carolina that is literally 40 minutes from everywhere, and we have only 1 provider, and as a lot of people say here, it's horrible.
All right, thank you. Thank you so much, Jamie, for your presentation. And now we will move on to our final presentation today by Charles Cox. And I just want to remind everyone that you are welcome to use the chat for questions and comments throughout. All right, so Charles Cox is a first-year PhD student at Texas Christian University in Fort Worth, Texas, with a focus on the Gulf South during the early Republic. And Charles is working under Dr. Gene Smith. His specific work deals with French Creole citizens in territorial Louisiana from 1762 to 1812. Charles received his bachelor's and his master's from the University of West Florida in Pensacola, Florida, where he worked under Dr. Aaron Stone. The paper he's presenting today is a short introduction to ideas and topics that his broader dissertation will turn to. And he is undergoing a review process right now with the Louisiana Historical Association for possible publication in the Louisiana History Journal. Thank you, Charles.
Thank you, Wendy, for the lovely introduction, and I appreciate everyone being here this afternoon. So give me 1 second here, get the PowerPoint pulled up. All right, and then let me start my timer. I don't want to keep anyone any longer than where we're supposed to be. So to begin, my paper is entitled Ancient Louisianians, French Creole Culture in Territorial Louisiana, 1762 to 1812. Before British colonists became American citizens, Western expansion had been on their minds. Following the British defeat to the French in the 7 Years' War in 1763, many colonists believed the lands west of the Appalachian Mountains would be open for settlement. However, they were mistaken. The Proclamation Act of 1763 barred colonists from moving there. 13 years later, Americans declared independence, and after the war, citizens began moving west. No one wanted the nation to expand more than Thomas Jefferson. With a stroke of a quill on April 30th, 1803, Jefferson doubled the size of the country and added the valuable port city of New Orleans with the Louisiana Purchase from France. Though the official transfer of the territory did not occur until December 30th, Jefferson recognized the monumental nature of the moment. Writing to soon-to-be territorial governor of Louisiana, William C.C. Claiborne, Jefferson stated, quote, "I consider the acquisition of this country as one of the most fortunate events which have taken place since the establishment of our independence." While Jefferson had achieved his goal of expanding the United States, it would not be easy to adapt those living in Louisiana to American culture, especially the residents of present-day Louisiana. Louisiana had great potential, but the French could never tap into it, especially in the city of New Orleans. Founded in 1718 as part of Scottish gambler, banker, and investor John Law's Mississippi Company. The original plan for New Orleans was to solve the French crisis of relying on English tobacco. The French envisioned an agricultural economy that rivaled that of the English. French officials begged the government to send over farmers and husbandmen, but it never happened. By 1731, after little success under the Mississippi Company, Law transferred Louisiana's governing rights back to France. It was hard for the French to establish dominance in the Gulf South region, with Spanish to the east and west of them. Following the French defeat to the British in the 7 Years' War, the Treaty of Paris in 1763 ceded all French lands in North America to Great Britain, except for Louisiana, which they ceded to their Spanish ally. Britain received Canada and the eastern half of French Louisiana, while the Spanish received the western half of Louisiana and including all settlements in the Mississippi Valley. However, there was one problem with Great Britain receiving the eastern half of Louisiana. The French had already signed it over to the Spanish the year before in the Treaty of Fontainebleau. Spain took its time taking over Louisiana. The first Spanish government, led by Don Antonio de Yola, arrived in 1766. The French colonial days in North America were over, but the French identity was far from dead. From 1762 to 1812, French Creole citizens living in Louisiana experienced what life was like under the control of two foreign powers, Spain and the United States. Under immense pressure to adapt to customs of both, French citizens retained their agency from the beginning of the Spanish rule in 1762 until 1812, when Louisiana became the 18th state of the United States. But how was this possible? Over the first 50 years that Louisiana belonged to Spain and then the United States, the territory underwent many different political, cultural, and environmental events that shaped the region. Through it, one thing remained was this strong sense of French identity that is unique to any other place where the French colonized in the future United States. The question here is why? Why and how did the original French roots planted in Louisiana exist through the rule of two different foreign powers and still exist today, especially in New Orleans? By exploring different cultural events, political resistance, and environmental forces, we get our answer. The first of these events we will look at is the 1768 insurrection. The first governor of Spanish Louisiana was Antonio de Yola. While Yola was a naval commander, he is best known for his work as a scientist and his work on platinum. While working on scientific projects in Cuba in June of 1765, Charles III selected Yola to serve as Louisiana's first Spanish governor and to establish the Spanish Cabildo in New Orleans. What made Spanish Louisiana different from other Spanish colonial territories is that the Spanish did not try to set a precedence of political dominance right from the outset. They allowed French customs to stand and laws to exist. On the morning of March 5th, 1765, Yola arrived on the Valente, a single 18-cannon vessel. Very few French citizens came to the port to greet him. Yola refused to have the French flag taken down and the Spanish flag raised. He wanted to show a sense of union between the two European powers. By October 1768, French and Spanish officials were at odds with one another. The French citizens, especially merchants and landowners, did not respect Spanish authority. While it is hard to argue against the fact that French citizens never wanted the Spanish to occupy Louisiana, it is equally hard to argue against that Yola and his government only prompted more hatred for the Spanish from his policies and territorial decisions. With Spanish assertions of power, many elite and middle-class French began talking about overthrowing the Spanish government. By the fall of 1768, after an economic crisis that existed since the onslaught of the Spanish rule, after the migrations of the Acadians and their displacement on lands in Louisiana that they never intended to inhabit, and after the regulations of trade and commerce, conditions ripened and a storm had brewed. The clouds of discontent were ready to burst open. The ringleaders of the coup d'etat were Denis Nicolas Foucault and Nicolas Chauvin de Lafreniere. Foucault had served as the French naval commander in Louisiana, while Lafreniere was the French attorney general. Finding supporters for the overthrow was not hard. Lafreniere gained 560 signatures from some of the most influential French citizens in the territory for a petition to the Spanish Supreme Council that called for the removal of Yola and the entire Spanish government from the territory. The petition's grievances included that the Spanish had forced the Acadians out of New Orleans and threatened to drive them from, quote, the colony and have them sold as slaves, that vessels from France and America be permitted to enter the Mississippi River, and that Spanish officials or military officers in Louisiana had to board vessels and leave the territory immediately. Foucault and Lafreniere reached out to the British in West Florida for help. British Brigadier General Frederick Haldeman did not outright refuse, but stated at this point he did not think it would be wise for him to intervene in them overthrowing the Spanish government. However, should the coup succeed, then they would be willing to protect them from a Spanish invasion. On the morning of October 28, 1768, units of French and German militias marched into New Orleans. For his safety, Yola returned to the Valente, the same vessel that brought him to New Orleans 2.5 years prior. Meeting the army in the streets was a French legion that had sworn their loyalty to Yola, led by Charles Philippe Aubry. Aubry had begged Foucault and Lafreniere to end the coup, but they refused and again demanded that the Spanish depart. For Aubry, his hands were tied. If he engaged the militias, how would that look for him, who had planned to return back to France? However, if he did not engage, he would forego his loyalty and duty as a military officer. Aubry sent 20 men to protect the Valente, and he sent 30 other troops to guard the city center. The marching in the streets turned into parades, eventually turning into drunkenness. Had Yola had the proper army in New Orleans, this would have been the chance to crush the rebellion. With no hope of Spanish reinforcements arriving in time, on November 1st, 1768, Yola sailed out of New Orleans and never returned. The rebel cause seemed victorious, but it simply postponed Spanish rule over the next year. Over the next year, Foucault, Lafreniere, and other French elites attempted to return the territory to the French. On November 22nd, the leaders of the coup drafted an 18-page letter to the king describing why they expelled the Spanish government. The main reasons they cited were for the actions of Yola. The leaders also addressed the unwarranted control of the slave trade and the treatment of the Acadians by the Spanish. But their greatest complaint was that they believed Yola tried to bring an end to the French Superior Council, which had dominated the political landscape during the French regime. France refused to take Louisiana back, and once the new Spanish governor, Alejandro O'Reilly, arrived in Louisiana in the fall of 1769, the conspirators were executed. Next, we will turn our attention to the 1788 fire in New Orleans. The day was March 21st, 1788. At the corner of Condo Street sat the private chapel of Don Vincetti Jose Nunez. Around mid-afternoon, a candle fell from his altar and engulfed the church in flames. The fire eventually spread from his church, torching every structure in its path. By 8 o'clock that night, 856 of the 1,100 structures in New Orleans had burnt to the ground. The day the fire occurred was not just a typical day, it was Good Friday. Hundreds of people were planning for the big weekend before everything they had owned transformed into ashes. An account from the Dunlap and Claypool's American Daily Advertiser describes the events of the fire, which burnt with irresistible fury, destroying the guardhouse and then the church, and carrying ruin and devastation to all quarters of the town. The Good Friday fire of 1788 is one of the lesser known events of the Spanish era in Louisiana. Few historians have given it the attention it deserves. There are two reasons why it is essential in telling the story of French culture and heritage in Louisiana. The first is the Spanish response to the fire. The Spanish governor of Louisiana was Esteban Rodriguez Miro. His first endeavor the following day was to provide tents and rations of rice for anyone in need. Not only did Miro distribute tents and rations, but over the following days, he gave out close to 2,000 pesos of his own money. Soon the tents became overcrowded, and on April 4th, Miro ordered the Spanish government to build temporary wooden shacks for the people to live in. The most significant aid, though, came from the waterways. Miro had long favored allowing outside trade with foreign powers into Louisiana. Ever since the Trade and Commerce Regulations of 1768, citizens inside territorial Louisiana could only legally trade with Spain. Miro saw the fire as an opportunity to open up the Mississippi River and the Gulf of Mexico. Miro defied Spanish law and sent 3 vessels to New York and Philadelphia to acquire provisions for the people of Louisiana. The original act provided 3 years of unlimited trade with foreign nations, but in 1791, the act became permanent. There would never be any other shipping or trade restrictions on the city after Miro lifted these. The second thing that came from the fire's aftermath was the city's new architecture and design. After the fire of 1788, the city transformed. The pattern and development of the city were set on a new course, a Spanish course. By 1795, the construction of new 2-story townhomes began across the city. Stores and shops were placed on the ground level, while the second floor served as the living quarters. A balcony lined with iron guardrails came off the second or even third floor. The balcony usually had 2 ways of accessing it. The roof was usually a single pitch and sloped to the patio. The rear of the house was surrounded by the kitchen, stable, and quarters for enslaved people. The structure of these houses have a lengthy Spanish historical background, but not a background from Spain. The style of the houses in New Orleans resembles those in the Spanish Caribbean. The houses have many open archways that allow the residents to view the street and behind the house to keep an eye on enslaved laborers. The interesting dynamic is it does not seem that the French cared about how their houses looked or the specific style of them. They just wanted them rebuilt. While the fires transformed the city into a Spanish look, it did not change the fact of how the houses and stores were used, especially when it came to the ideology and thinking behind slavery. Finally, we examine a cultural phenomenon that has become a staple of life in Louisiana: balls and dances. In 1803, Louisiana became an official territory of the United States. The first territorial governor was William C.C. Claiborne. One of Claiborne's first letters as governor describes French anxiety in Louisiana, especially in New Orleans. On January 10, 1804, Claiborne wrote to then Secretary of State James Madison that he had grown accustomed to the people of Louisiana and believed that they were crude and unfit for a representative government. In the same letter, Claiborne also described another cultural phenomenon that still exists in New Orleans to this day: balls and dances. He reported an uproar amongst French and American citizens attending a ball about the performance and specific style of dances. From Claiborne's letter, one can gauge how vital he thought this issue was. He quoted saying, "I believe this affair is at an end, but being desirous at the present juncture of communicating every circumstance which might have a political tendency, I have deemed it worthy of mentioning." Claiborne viewed the dispute over the preference of French or American dances as potentially having a great political impact. A few weeks later, Claiborne wrote to Mayor Etienne de Dubois on his decision to place a small militia of 15 men outside the city ballroom to, quote, tend to the preservation of good order. 3 days later, Claiborne drafted another letter to Madison describing the process of the balls. Usually during the winter season, there were as many as 2 balls a week. Every white male paid 50 cents to enter. Women, who were likely not charged admittance, attended from every rank. The balls thus prompted a degree of socialization among different classes, including free and enslaved Africans. Claiborne thought it was necessary to inform Madison because he needed to understand that the balls in New Orleans, quote, occupied much of the public mind. While regular balls took place, masked balls had been a tradition and standard in New Orleans. In 1781, the Spanish government debated the problem of free and enslaved Africans attending public balls. The Cabildo feared that wearing masks would entice free and enslaved Africans to commit crimes. By the mid-1790s, following the Haitian Revolution and the French Revolution, the Cabildo outlawed masked balls altogether, fearing that they presented an opportunity for both French and African insurrection against the Spanish government. Masked balls, which had become a staple of French culture in New Orleans, did not return until the 1820s. Claiborne's attitudes towards balls differed from most Americans. Most Americans did not see how dressing up and dancing could be important to an individual. Claiborne saw them as a way of appeasing French citizens in Louisiana. By examining Claiborne's letter books, one can see the anxiety in him of governing a place and a people he knew nothing about, nor could he speak their language. Claiborne's fear of insurrection by French citizens guided much of his behavior and views of the French. He was aware, though, that Americans also attended these balls. After he personally experienced a brawl almost taking place, he and the New Orleans City Council passed regulations requiring the presence of at least 2 officers at every ball. Also, weapons were not allowed into the venue. There was even a law passed on the style of dances and the format in which they were performed. The order of dances was 2 French quadrilles, followed by an English quadrille, and lastly, a waltz before the sequence started over. Balls also presented a chance for white males to meet and interact with free African women. It was common for wealthy French whites to keep a free African mistress in the city. Population numbers almost demanded it. 1/3 of the city was free Africans, most of whom were free African women. Free African women also outnumbered white women in the city. Many French citizens became accustomed to actually being around free African women. One of Governor Yola's first acts in office was to allow Frenchmen to marry African women. However, the 1808 Louisiana Civil Code banned the marriage of whites and Africans, free or enslaved. Another type of ball that became popular in New Orleans during the early 19th century was subscription balls. Also called society balls, subscription balls allowed white males to purchase tickets for the 3-month ball season. They could bring a female guest for free of charge. The first subscription balls took place in the 1810-1811 ball season. From 1810 onward, all major ballrooms held both subscription and public balls. What is unique about subscription balls is that, like public balls, they did not discriminate against class. The subscription was to keep dangerous and criminal activities out of balls rather than a mechanism to make balls socially exclusive. Once the United States took over the territory in 1803, they divided Louisiana into several different territories. In 1812, the modern state of Louisiana became the 18th state of the United States. While other states formed out of the territory, such as Missouri and Arkansas, lost their French culture rapidly and adapted to Americanization, the land of the bayous did not. To this day, French culture is at the core of many Louisianians who trace their family heritage to the 18th and 19th centuries. What makes Louisiana unique is that, unlike any other place in the United States that French colonized, French culture remained after years of foreign rule. The last question we need to address is why. Why did French citizens who saw the French struggle to succeed in Louisiana hold on to their culture and heritage so passionately? The answer reverts back to the French. The French never cared about Louisiana. For the Crown, it was a strategic territory to block Western expansion by the British and to control a river route from the colonies in New France down to the Gulf of Mexico. As long as French citizens paid their dues to the Crown, they were basically free to govern and rule themselves. This allowed French Louisiana to establish a culture and identity based on issues of class and race. Fearful of change, the French fought the Spanish and were skeptical of what life would look like under the rule of the United States. By having a laissez-faire attitude towards Louisiana, the French crown allowed French culture to be planted deep into the ground of Louisiana and remains there still to this day. Thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Charles. Now that all 3 of our speakers have given their presentations, and it is, according to my my desktop, I'm seeing that it's 5:11 p.m. We can go a few minutes past 5:15 if we have some questions that our presenters will answer and at least try to answer or address. So at this moment, if you would like to type a question or a comment into the chat, you are welcome to, and we have time for a little bit of discussion. Well, I would like to ask about the presence. Oh, I'm sorry. We do have a question in the chat. Okay, wonderful. I will defer to the folks in the chat. So one question is perhaps that is addressed to Charles. Did you do any research on how the War of 1812 may have affected the dancing culture during the period that you examined? Do you want to address that?
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you for the question. I greatly appreciate it. Unfortunately, I would have to say no. My work only kind of goes up to when Louisiana becomes a state. I don't really kind of go past that at all. However, for a greater project that I am doing or possibly working on in the future, I'm working on kind of a different view of Claiborne and these anxieties that he feels through his journal. So I'm thinking about these ways that Claiborne wrote about Frenchness and French culture in Louisiana and how it eventually adapted in his writing over his years. So I have copies of all his journals, and I'm kind of going through that period of time. That's just an idea for something that I have later down the road eventually. But with that, that would push me kind of into that realm of the War of 1812, which I know my advisor would greatly appreciate, considering he's a War of 1812 historian himself. But so to answer your question, no, I haven't at this moment, but I could definitely see it being something that Claiborne would probably still write about, because even the one that I read about in 1803, there's even up to 1805 that he's still talking about these balls and kind of dances in his letter books. So I could see it maybe being a topic that he continues to talk about throughout his time in Territory Orleans once it becomes that. So.
Thank you, Charles. I'm also wondering about the long-lasting sort of Frenchness of New Orleans and of Southern Louisiana, and how that Frenchness affects people outside of their racial categories. So, there are people of African descent who adopt French culture or who are born into French culture. Even some indigenous peoples of Louisiana adopted French culture, the home of French, so to speak, and others as well, mixed race people adopting French culture. So I'm curious about how Frenchness becomes sort of something that people acquire and identify with.
Yeah, so that's a great question, and thank you for that. So my talk here in the broader paper is 33 pages, and I kind of expand on that a little bit in the broader paper of where this talk developed from. So what's unique is I actually compare New Orleans to French Huguenot societies in the Northeast. And I kind of look at how these French Huguenot societies, once they come in, they kind of very quickly transition to Anglo traditions and customs. And within about 2 generations, actually the French language is forgotten by them. Like a lot of the descendants of these French Huguenots kind of forget this language, and it's completely gone. And so with it, that was kind of one of the things that stuck out to me, was why Louisiana is unique. And I'm careful with my words, because I place it in this idea that Louisiana and New Orleans is kind of being a case study of my work, is unique to anywhere that the French colonized in what we consider the United States. Because if you look at Quebec in Canada, it's still the same uniqueness up there as well. So I kind of just, I kind of make sure that my wording is correct when I frame it. But to kind of answer that broader question, I think a lot of the reason why this French culture is kind of maintained, and even where free Africans and enslaved Africans kind of adapted to it as well as this Creole culture, was the fact that for one, the Spanish did allow interracial marriages between the two. And so that kind of helped blend these cultures together, I feel like. And New Orleans is the kind of first traditional wild, wild west in a way. It's a city full of corruption, gamblers, prostitution, a lot of influential French citizens, like I described, had African mistresses that they were known about. And also, I think it kind of fits the terminology of this idea too, which I kind of closed my talk on, of this idea of solitary neglect, which I don't bring up in this, but so roughly what this idea is in 1775 on the Parliament floor, Edmund Burke gave a speech to Parliament basically describing this idea that of solitary neglect, which was that the British had just basically let the colonies run themselves. And without rule, they waited too long to implement like the Stamp Act, and they waited kind of just too long to enforce these rules. And while I don't think it fits from like a governmental perspective to the French, I think it's the same idea that during the French time in Louisiana, because they didn't see it as necessarily a hub of colonial enterprise for them, because they were really never successful there, they allowed kind of this French citizen and French identity to rule themselves. And then when a new government comes into motion with the Spanish, they're not willing to adjust to what they want them to do. And so I think this idea that these French citizens in Louisiana were not as overly protected or overly enforced by France itself, that that they were able to allow these customs to grow and plant, and they refused to kind of adapt to anything else. They almost made their own style of Frenchness in Louisiana. So,
Thank you
I
so
hope that
much for
answered.
that.
I know it was kind of long-winded.
That's okay. And Beer, you have a question in the chat. Do you know if any images depicting washerwomen in the neutral ground exist?
Well, great question, of course, but unfortunately, I haven't stumbled on any images also in the Picayune or anywhere else about the washerwoman. So I don't know. But I must admit, most of my research, all my research, is done online through newspaper archives that they could access municipality accounts. So it's still my goal to go to New Orleans someday and do some research there for my topic. And maybe there are some images, but I doubt it, but I hope there will be some.
Wonderful. So of those who are still with us, do you have any other questions to add to the chat for either Beer, Jamie, or Charles? We'll give it a few seconds if folks are typing into the chat, if there are any other questions, or if you all have questions for each other. All right, well, I think that ends our panel on ethnicity and culture in early Louisiana history. Thank you everyone for participating, for being present. It was wonderful hearing from all of you, and I hope that everyone is able to attend and enjoy the rest of the the LHA, online panels as well as in-person panels in March. So thank you, everyone. Thank you so very much.